This scene in Mad Men is a really great visualization of the way that patriarchal dominance works in the sense of like a social power dynamic and just how intricate these power plays tend to get the closer that the men are to the top of the hierarchy. The interesting thing about Pete and Dawn is that even though Pete, the junior account executive who's still learning the ropes, both he and Dawn realize that Pete was born into wealth. He was born into unearned power, privilege, and advantage. Whereas Dawn, and we don't know this yet as the audience, so the first time watcher is left kind of wondering, like, what is this weird tension between these two men, and why is Dawn so seemingly threatened by Pete, and like, what's Pete's angle? Why does he think he can sort of undermine Dawn like this? And that's because these dynamics play out without ever being directly acknowledged. So even before we find out that Dawn was supposed to be a nobody who sort of like performed his way to the top, we see that dynamic play out between him and Pete. Pete senses that there's something about Dawn that is not quite right. And by that, I mean he's not a man of pedigree like Pete. He doesn't have that natural, like, ease, effort, and sense of belonging that both Pete and Roger Sterling kind of share. Pete and Roger speak the same language. Pete and Dawn, however, do not speak the same language. And Pete is very weirded out by that. He's like, why is this man so threatened by me? Like, I'm really trying to impress him. All the stuff I've said would work on Roger. Roger would love it. Roger would eat it up. But Dawn is almost kind of eager to snuff out that kind of behavior. And I think it's because he doesn't want Pete and Roger kind of linking up on that Nepo baby thing. Like, he knows that his and Roger's alliance is ultimately, at the end of the day, kind of fickle. Roger's a man of favor and whimsy, and so basically everything could change on a whim. And in this scene right here, Pete is kind of trying to test Dawn. He's trying to test, like, there's something off about you, something stinks here, and I'm going to try to figure it out because I just saw a crack in your armor. This is immediately after they storm out of the first and very unsuccessful meeting with Rachel Mencken, who caught Dawn completely off guard simply by being a woman. And I almost think there's something to that. I almost think it's like less weird for a rich man to be thrown off by a rich, powerful woman because like they run in those circles where women can be rich and powerful. It supersedes certain gender dynamics to where like it's not as weird for rich men to be exposed to like a rich woman. Whereas for a poor man, somebody who grew up in poverty and somebody who's definitely upper middle class, but not quite rich yet, and doesn't come from money and doesn't have that sort of like Nepo baby upbringing, he would be very easily thrown off by a powerful woman because he wouldn't have been exposed to them like throughout his childhood. And he would be very threatened by their opinions, whereas these like richer, more upper echelon men, no, they seem to have this idea of women as like still like lesser than men, but they know how to deal with the rich woman. They were like, Dawn, just amuse her, like just, play along. This is fine, like try to explain to like her woman brain that she should still spend her money here, like, you know what I mean. They're kind of like, why are you so freaked out, bro? And he's so freaked out because he's like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't understand this dynamic. Why are you guys not threatened? And sort of like, I don't know what to do. So Pete senses this crack in Dawn's sort of facade, and he attempts to flip their dynamic real quick. He tries to sneak this in past Dawn, and he tries to make nice with him. But he still happens to underestimate Dawn. He tries to slip in a buddy in there as he extends his hand. And Dawn is like, no, I'm not going to shake your hand. on you calling me buddy. Like, this is not the dynamic we're going to have. Don knows very well how to operate within the male to male dynamics of the patriarchy. He knows exactly how to take control of a situation. And so when Pete realizes that he's been out alphaed, he's been out dominated, this is probably the moment in which he sort of vows to make Dawn his little bitch one day. Like, this is probably the moment where that seed of extreme resentment is planted, because Pete is very entitled. He definitely has this sense of like, but I always get what I want. He's probably trying to mimic something that he's seen his father do, right? To sort of assert dominance over other men in similar types of situations. But the reason it doesn't work for Pete is because, as I mentioned in my previous video about this, Pete's dad doesn't work here. Like, he has connections to where he can't really be fired, because Don does try to get rid of him later on down the road. And he finds out that he can't, and he finds out he's going to have to make nice with Pete sort of being there. Like, Pete's there for good. Pete's there until Pete doesn't want to be there anymore, because his father has pull over like some of their advertising clients. But all that to say, Pete kind of has to carve his own path here. He's realizing now that it's going to be harder than he thinks. Like, he really thought he was going to be able to come in here, flex a few muscles, etc., and then kind of have everybody wrapped around his little finger. But again, Don has an image to protect. Don's been building this fake persona in order to try and fit in for so long that he's not just going to let some kid come in there and take it all from him. And so for the people that are here from my previous videos, I just want to reiterate that the reason why I'm breaking down this first episode frame by frame is because not only is it very densely packed with sort of all the setup and all of the imagery and foreshadowing, but it's also because if you're going to understand the rest of this analysis, I need you to know what I know. I need you to see this from the perspective that I'm seeing it from, so that when I'm analyzing other episodes like later down the line, you'll be able to understand kind of the shorthand of what I'm saying. If we kind of put in the hard work now and we go over most of the themes and most of the storylines that we're going to see unfold in the show, we can get by in later videos on a much less dense analysis. I hope that makes sense. So bear with me, because this is going to lay the groundwork for how we're going to perceive, understand, and talk about the rest of it. Remember, language matters. Concepts matter. Language and terms and the deeper meaning of things, which is often unspoken, creates our reality. And you need to realize that this is the reality. All of this whole 1960s like return to back when America was great again, this whole dream that our current administration is trying to sell, has never been better exposed for the lie and the inherently evil and oppressive system that it is, then I believe in this show. This show is America's mirror. This show is America's inception and reflection. Everything that is built upon in this show and with these characters is a look at how this country actually works and what the American dream actually costs. And it's a great example of how that dream is only available, it turns out, to a select few people. And it's the unspoken rules that make it so easy to sell, because the people in power can just lie. Words mean whatever the people in power want them to mean. And it's very important that we recognize that and that we know how to counter that, but especially that we know what to expect if this is allowed to continue. The reason we're taking a look sort of backwards, both in like terms of social commentary and general retrospective, like we're looking at a show that's all about seemingly nostalgia, but it's really about what's beneath the nostalgia, like the truth beneath the good old days and the nostalgia of it all. But it's also extremely pertinent because nostalgia is what the people that are currently in power are gonna try to use in order to sell you this big fat lie. The whole cigarette subplot of like, okay, the jig is up. How else do we sell this? Like, how else do we market this? How else do we rewrite the narrative? Is like another thing that I believe is going to come up over and over and over again, both in our present and in our past. So we need to really examine this show, because this is the reality that we are being advertised and our consent is being manufactured for right now. They want offices full of men, right? That's why they got rid of DEI. That's why they deprofessionalized jobs that are female dominated fields. They want to return to this. And so it's very important that you know the intricacies of how this works, of how MAGA works, of how the good old days used to work, because this is what we're about to be up against. All right, y'all, I'm switching back to this just because I get so tired of having to take screenshots and then change the green screen and like deal with it. It's so glitchy. And anyways, I hope y'all don't mind. So in the very next scene, Peggy finds out that the doctor from her earlier exam did in fact sleep with Joan. He wasn't just like lying about it or making jokes or whatever, because here is Joan bragging explicitly about that encounter. You see Peggy kind of looking up at her with this awe and like she's kind of impressed. And I think in her mind, Peggy perceives this to be sort of the modern way. Like, we'll find out later that her family like goes to church and her mom's religious and like not very modern, but Peggy's clearly very eager to write her own story, and she's eager to sort of experience the modern life and everything. And she's kind of looking at her like, okay, Joan, okay, I see you, so this is what we're supposed to be doing. Okay. In reality, though, I mean, obviously hindsight for us is 2020. We can understand this as the, violation of a power dynamic that it really is. And we can also understand that the doctor was less flexing about getting to have sex with Joan and more just like flexing his general misogyny, kind of warning Peggy to not turn out like Joan. Like, it wasn't a compliment at all. He was kind of shitting on Joan, but neither Peggy or Joan seemed to realize that. I don't know. Once again, and I feel like we're both going to get tired of me saying this, but every scene is important. Every single scene. This is like very quick paced and very dense storytelling. So Joan is about to walk Peggy into what she calls the nerve center of the office. Now, I want you to understand that at this point, you have gotten to meet basically every single bigwig, every single relevant and or important man in the company. You've seen Don, you've seen Roger, you've seen all the account executives, the art director, etc., right? And yet, apparently, none of us have yet to see the nerve center of the office, the most important, most crucial place to its operation. So let's observe who is in the nerve center of the office. A few skilled employees that you and your boss, both your jobs depend on them. And so here's Joan doing Peggy a huge solid and introducing her directly to these women who are actually responsible for everyone's success, really, pretty much directly. And Joan makes sure that, she gets in good with them. So the line about she couldn't get a call through, rude little thing, is basically, again, supposed to make us understand that this is a very real power dynamic. Like, these ladies literally can either get you fired or make sure that you stay employed. And if you're rude to them, that's a wrap. It's over for you. So, interestingly enough, again, don't think that it's lost on the people that wrote and created this show, that this exposes the fact that women are the real lifeblood of almost any operation, almost any sort of organization that is male dominated and male forward and whatever, is typically run behind the scenes by a bunch of women that are way more technically proficient, way more hardworking, logically oriented, and able to stay calm and keep composed under extreme pressure than the men who are getting paid millions to quote unquote run the business. And it's because in order to succeed in a white supremacist, capitalism driven, male centered society, you don't need to be able to work hard. You just need to be able to put forth a certain image, a certain narrative. The people who work hard are working hard. There's no view. You notice this, right? You notice they are not in a corner office. They are staring at a wall. They are cooped up in this little closet, sitting all right next to each other, when it would make way more sense to put these ladies in like a better location, give them some space, make sure they can really work under all the pressure that they're under, except for they're actually expected to perform a very tough and very complicated job in very suboptimal conditions. Meanwhile, men like Don, Pete, Roger, Sal, you name them, literally can't succeed in the most luxurious of circumstances, surrounded by all the help and assistance in the world. They can still fuck up a pitch meeting so colossally that they embarrass themselves, they embarrass the firm, they crack under pressure, they get emotional, etc. Meanwhile, the kind of understanding and synergy that exists between all of these women in just this one scene is a marvel to watch, like in action, the way that they come in when the lines are so busy and they're just plugging things in and out and they have to know exactly where everything goes. But at the same time, they're able to pause, take a little break, and acknowledge these women, and everything is perfectly cordial, perfectly polite, etc. People know not to overstay their welcome. There's also like these unspoken rules, but they're much nicer. They're much more accommodating overall. Before we get into the legs comment. So basically, this scene is supposed to kind of illustrate the way that women operate as opposed to men, and the cooperative and sort of accommodating dynamics, being able to rise above almost any setting, right? Whereas men that have to deal in sort of dominant, like dick measuring type of dynamics, they fail at the most simplest tasks every single time. Like Dawn was doing the pitch last minute, couldn't handle a little bit of research, stormed out of a meeting with a woman, and all that. And he has two secretaries, mind you, that treat him, in Joan's own words, something between a mother and a waitress. So he literally has people at his beck and call, and still is ultimately kind of incompetent and has no awareness of how to cooperate with people. He only knows how to get the upper hand in a situation. Okay, so on to the legs comment. This is like the fourth time that somebody has commented on Peggy's body and tried to instruct her on how to dress it, how to appeal to the male gaze, accentuate her features, operate within the beauty standards of the patriarchy, etc. And none of it was ever solicited. And none of it was ever warranted, by the way, because Peggy, again, I'll point out, she looked perfectly nice on her first day. But she's really starting to like pick up on, wow, like this is really a value here. And it feels very much like I'm expected to use my sexuality to navigate this workplace. And so we'll see how that kind of plays out for her by the end of this episode, but this is not leading her in the right direction. But it's also like you can tell it's very much a dynamic, it's very much a consideration, and Peggy is starting to pick up on that, and Joan is kind of looking back at the ladies with a silent like, thank you, I tried to tell her, but thanks for like kind of having my back. And Peggy's like, what the fuck? Did I really just hear this again for the fourth time today? I love the shot of the building. I think it's supposed to represent that brute power and the climb to the top. These almost look like racetracks, and it looks like an endless race towards nothing. Again, am I probably overthinking this? Am I doing like probably a little too much literary / visual analysis? Perhaps. I don't know. Only the people that worked on the show could really, I guess, have the real answer to that question. But nevertheless, I press on. I said we'd go frame by frame, and I did not freaking lie, did I? All right, so we're in the Lucky Strike meeting. They tell us to make a safer cigarette. We do it, and then suddenly that's not good enough. Might as well be living in Russia. So this is where you're supposed to understand that we're dealing with a very laissez-faire capitalism, Atlas shrugged, screw the government and their regulatory overreach, let the men do men things, let the men dominate the world as they see fit. Let the consumer choose. Just notice how they're kind of framing every narrative rather than, holy shit, we just found out that these products that we make are giving 4 out of 5 people cancer. There's like a scientifically proven really high associated risk with that. We are not worried about the ethics of it. We're worried about our profit margins, and we're couching that concern in a language of, you see, it's that damn government overreaching again. People should have a choice. And the choice is not whether they get cancer or not. The choice is whether they should still be able to choose to smoke cigarettes. They're trying to frame government regulation as like impeding on personal freedoms. So they're all smoking and coughing. This scene is so fucking funny because it's like, this is very reminiscent of truly of how like obstinate men are because they believe in these ideas of masculinity. And it flies also in the face of Dawn's entire thesis that people don't want to do things anymore just because they're dangerous or whatever. And it's like, look it, this is a room full of men who now know that there are medically proven consequences to smoking, and yet they're gonna sit here and all just like smoke in each other's face and cough and basically experience like the very real symptoms and consequences of it and just pretend like they're fine and just be very obstinate because they confuse that with bravery. They confuse that with real like independence and like forging your own path, which is what Dr. Greta tried to tell Dawn, and he just wouldn't listen. And it's like, you literally have a room here full of men that are smoking in the face of danger. Like, they would probably be more likely to pick up a pack of cigarettes with a skull and crossbones on it, like Sal said. They'd love it. So we have another very interesting visual here, and I got me a little pointer so I don't have to use my finger anymore and subject y'all to that. Again, am I maybe overthinking it? Maybe. But notice how both Roger and Pete's hair is combed to the same side, and they're sitting kind of like together, and then here's Dawn. And his hair is combed to a different side. And he's kind of like, almost this intruder. Like, they could almost pass for father and son. And I think it just is once again another way to visually reinforce the fact that Pete and Roger have something much greater in common than Roger and Dawn ever will. They understand each other because of pedigree and upbringing, whereas Dawn and Roger mostly bond over like heteronormative standards and sort of like their ability to perform masculinity, I guess. So this guy's talking about he got a call from some of his competitors and they're getting sued by the federal government because of the health claims they made. Now, mind you, Dr. Greta had already told Dawn this. So we're getting into some like capitalism critique here where Roger's trying to explain to these Lucky Strike people that that basically the cat's out of the bag, and he's calling it, mass manipulation of the media because he's again trying to mirror their language. He's trying to speak their kind of conspiratorial language of like big government and like overreach and all that. And what does this man do? He hits him right back with, hell, that's what I pay you for. He really said, okay, then out manipulate them. I don't care. And, gives anecdotal evidence that like, I smoke him and my granddad smoked him and he lived till he was 95 and he got hit by a truck. He didn't even die from that. And again, Roger's like trying to explain to them, we're no longer allowed to claim that your product is safe. And this man comes back with what do you want me to do? We've already funded our own tobacco research center to put this whole rumor to rest. And so again, they're all speaking in code, right? They're saying terms like, government overreach and mass media manipulation and put this whole rumor to rest. It's not a rumor. It's a scientific finding. That's supposed to show you the beginnings of big business overreach. This shows you the beginning of the real battle between sort of the American dream and who gets to control that narrative. Is it the government, or is it big business, or is it the people? Which I don't think that's ever in question. I think you're supposed to kind of understand that the real battle, at least right here, right now, is between big government and big business. And they're sort of fighting over this idea of the American dream. What is the American dream? And I think the thesis of the show is that the institution that's going to win the battle is going to be the one that gets to write the narrative. And you'll see later on, this will definitely overlap, because at some point these guys are going to take on a political campaign, which we'll have to get into. But this is where that tension really starts to show in America. It's during this time of the formation of the narrative, the advertisement of what we'll come to know as the American dream. This is basically big money, big business, and government sort of deciding and dividing who gets to dictate what about the American dream, who gets to be the one to sort of narrate the American dream. Anyway, and fun fact, they eventually figure out that it's much more effective for them to just get into bed together and fuck us together. So we've been fucked ever since. It's resulted in the biggest monopoly ever, which is the government, big business, and advertising all in bed together. That's what we got from all this capitalist innovation, by the way. Okay, so let's hear, but not really hear, Dawn's pitch. You're going to have to either read, and I'll try to keep up with the captions and read them aloud, because I know not everyone is glued to their phone watching this. So Dawn says, I'm a Lucky Strike man from way back, so. And he kind of waits, closes the folder. Again, everyone's in suspense. He's reading the room, clearly stalling. He's sweating bullets, and in jumps Pete. And he says, I might have a solution. At Sterling Cooper, we've been pioneering the burgeoning field of research, and our research shows that the health risks associated with your product is not the end of the world. People get in their cars every day to go to work, and some of them die. Cars are dangerous. There's nothing you can do about it. You still have to get where you're going. Cigarettes are exactly the same. So why don't we simply say, so what if cigarettes are dangerous? You're a man. The world is dangerous. Smoke your cigarette. You still have to get where you're going. And here we're supposed to catch two things. One, that obviously somehow that research got to Pete. And so he pitches the idea that she kind of suggested. The whole smoking cigarettes is dangerous, so fuck it, whatever. Interestingly enough, this younger guy likes the angle. So this is Lee Garter Jr. So this is this guy's son. This is a Nepo baby kind of relationship. But this guy is old fashioned, and he's not trying to break the mold. He's trying to keep the American dream alive, if anything. So he's what the hell kind of slogan is that? That's your slogan? You're going to die anyway, die with us? And Pete starts explaining about the death wish and the psychological principle. And he's if we could just tap into that, the market potential is whatever. This guy becomes completely indignant because, again, he is the old guard. He is what are you talking about? He grew up with cigarettes being seen as this safe thing. They're associated with military service, they're associated with manhood, masculinity, and they're associated with health benefits and not health risks. So he's I'm in the tobacco business. And he shows his old fashionedness right here when he's what the hell are you talking about? Are you insane? I'm not selling rifles here. I'm in the tobacco business. We're selling America. And then he says a racial slur here, so I'm going to replace it with the proper term. But you can either read it on the screen or imagine what he would have said instead of the Native Americans gave it to us for shit's sake. I know for a fact they did not cast an old man that looks particularly like this and had him make these facial expressions on accident, okay? This is supposed to represent the rotting corpse, the dying breed of white men who believed that America was gave it to us. They were entitled to America, the American dream, etc. They're not actually about danger. They're about safety. And this is also a commentary on how like Americans don't understand themselves because of the narrative that they've been given. They've been given a narrative that they are citizens of the greatest country in the world, nothing bad can happen to them, etc. And they don't realize that it only applies to people who look like this. And they don't realize their like complete and utter sense of entitlement. And so whereas like younger men are trying to sort of change that narrative and they're trying to create this post-war relevance for themselves, the old men are still in this kind of mindset of, this is America, this is the greatest country on earth. Everything works out for everyone here. And so this younger guy is like, all right, dad's upset, let's get him out of here. Meeting's over. And he's like, the bright side at least is that if we have this problem, everybody has this problem. And there, Don gets his stroke of genius, his like last minute sort of, how do I exploit this idea? And it comes to him. He's like, before you leave, can I just say something? Because, there's nothing to lose, right? He let Pete sort of try something that didn't work. And now Don is going to throw a Hail Mary. So he's working by process of elimination. Don is not good at advertising. He's good at recognizing situations that can be exploited. He's good at reading the unspoken rules in the room. So he knows that he's now been given his in, which is, well, everybody has this problem. And Roger's like, about time for you to come through. And here's what Don comes through with. He's like, basically, you guys are in a spot where everyone associates your product with cancer. The angle is they kind of did you a favor, which obviously this old man once again doesn't like. He's like, oh yeah, should we say thank you to them, whatever? Don is clearly flying by the seat of his pants here. And he's like, Lee Jr. is right. If you can't make those health claims, neither can your competitors. And so to me, kind of per this scene, this is just Don realizing that he can still speak the old language. So he's speaking directly to the oldest person in the room, not the person that's going to eventually take over and he's going to actually have to deal with, which you will see will come back to bite him in the ass. But even besides all that, it's like Don studied the old guard. He studied the old-fashioned meritocratic way of like selling the American dream, not this kind of new and ironic and self-aware way that people were starting to communicate in. Basically, this guy was like, why can't we just put a positive spin on it? And Don was like, I can work with that. Once again, he's going to sell this old man's idea basically back to himself. Now that his son has given Don the sort of runway to put that idea on, okay? Because once again, he came in there with nothing to sell, with no plan. He was going to just start flying by the seat of his pants. And it wasn't necessarily a good look for him to just let Pete take over like that because, again, it showed that he didn't have a concrete plan, or the one that he had, he was kind of, worried about. But here he is. He's going to come up with something in real time. Again, there's no volume here because I don't want to get copyrighted. So Don is like, this is the greatest advertising opportunity since the invention of cereal. We have 6 identical companies making 6 identical products. All of this makes sense to Don because this is when Don sort of entered. This like reset kind of language really makes sense to Don. He can always sort of work with a blank slate, and he's realized, I've got a blank slate. The simplest idea will seem really good, because basically the playing field has been evened. And that's exactly how Dawn, as a concept, spoilers if you are not far into the series or if you haven't, made it, skip the next 5 seconds, but Don Draper is dead. This is Dick Whitman. It's like Don Draper's only skill is being able to create something out of nothing. So he's like, they're making 6 identical products. We can say anything we want. How do you make your cigarettes? So very much flying by the seat of his pants. There's a little Nepo baby shade in there too, because Lee Jr. says, I don't know. And Senior says, shame on you. And proceeds to describe like the entire process. And then he happens to say something that kind of zings. He says, we toast it. And Don writes down on the board, it's toasted, which like in itself, is that a genius marketing ad campaign? No, it's very simple. It's very simple. The kind of campaigns that we will see Peggy coming up with, they're going to be a level up from this. But again, because Don senses a blank slate, as something he can tell any kind of narrative on, he's like, it's just important to be the first to tell the narrative, which is like a multifaceted, multi-level commentary on who Don is and the kind of people that America really works for. You know, it's all about getting there first. So Lee Jr., again, using his critical thinking, says, but everybody's tobacco's toasted. And Don says, no, everybody else's tobacco is poisonous. Yours is toasted. And here comes Roger with a narrative. Again, unspoken, the language of the unspoken. Okay. Well, gentlemen, I don't think I have to tell you what you just witnessed here. He's basically Tom Sawyering them. He's like, you just saw the eighth world wonder. You just witnessed genius in action. When really you witnessed a man who didn't read the research, who's flying by the seat of his pants, just make something up on the spot. And it's not really that great. And you know, what this is foreshadowing is the eventual, again, spoilers, the eventual fact that Lucky Strike is going to leave them because the old guard is going to change and Don is no longer going to be able to keep up with it. And he's going to throw a fit and like try to burn them all down to the ground. And it's only going to end up backfiring on him. Like, just know I'm not pulling this together out of nowhere. I promise I have reasons for saying what I'm saying. This is basically the old way of selling things. Don is already outdated. He's already showing his age and the era that he really belongs to. He's kind of on this cusp between Roger and Pete. And the American dream is like accelerating. It's accelerating, you know, really out of everyone's reach. And Don is kind of starting to feel that. Don knows a thing or two about getting there first and, you know, rewriting a narrative and sort of reinvention, right? So Don is now basically promising Lucky Strike that this is your reinvention. And Lee Jr. again calls him out. I think you do. I think you just know what you saw here because, again, it's trying to show that this new generation has a reason to question the American dream, has reason to question the narrative. And it's only the old people that are really mad about that. The young people are very intellectually honest and curious. But of course, in the end, Don is going to be able to, because this is a room full of men, he's going to be able to sell the idea and basically kind of dominate the narrative and the situation. And he's just selling the shit out of it. He's like saying just all these random things. He's like, it's all about reassurance, you know, it's all about comfort. So again, this is kind of meant to communicate that Don understands the American dream as comfort. He's like, it's all okay. It's all going to be okay. You're okay. And Pete's like, I don't get it. What is that supposed to mean? And this guy's like, it's toasted. You know, he only had to out alpha, right? The oldest guy in the room. He's like, I get it. Yeah. And Don's like, okay, I guess that worked. Like, he doesn't have the confidence of a man who knows what he just did. This is where Roger calls him out. He's like, you had me worried there. I don't know if you were drunk or not drunk. And that's another commentary on the socially accepted levels of alcoholism based on your seniority level. But Roger's like, oh man, I thought that you had missed your step. But basically your ability to speak to the guy in the room who's barely holding on to power, but like still has it after all, has impressed me. You know, I don't know if you were drunk or not drunk, but that was inspired. And here goes Don. Now he can tell the truth because it makes him look good. He says, for the record, I pulled it out of thin air. So thank you up there. And Roger says, I think you're looking in the wrong direction. Let it not be lost on you that Roger is in Don's office right now. It's almost like Don can't see what's happening right in front of him. The fact that Roger's in his office now, the man he once had to beg for a job off the street, is now sitting in his office drinking his liquor and asking him, what do you say we reconsider the presidential campaign? That's exactly what I meant earlier when I said they're going to get in bed together with big business, government, and advertising. Advertising is going to be the ultimate evil that brings the unholy trinity together. And Don is like, that's going to be harder to sell than like some freaking cigarettes. He's like, please don't give me another thing to like try and figure out. I'll fuck it up. Roger's basically trying to sell him on doing Richard Nixon's campaign. This is where Peggy buzzes him and tells him he's got visitors, and he goes, "Could you be a little more specific, honey?" There's that honey again. And again, door opens. So this is kind of that same idea. These young men are breaking down the doors. Like, they're not waiting for the doors to be opened. They're not operating out of this idea of comfort. They're at this point, they're in full capitalism mode because everybody's competition, which means it's going to push out any kind of dinosaur level thinking out faster. Whenever the playing field becomes more level, it means progress is happening. So the only reason to unlevel out the playing field again, right? You have to ask yourself, why would our government and our administration be trying to do that right now, if not to create a sort of stagnant, clearly redlined, very clearly separated by status, class, skin color, etc., like very clear and easy to read. Like, Don is struggling to read like nuance. He's struggling to read anything that's not been made like very, very clear. Really, his biggest problem is not that. In his mind, his biggest problem is that these youths are like breaking down the doors. They're not waiting to be invited. They're just here, you know? And so it disturbs kind of the America that Don was hoping to really be able to plant his roots in. And when the boys come in to celebrate, and Pete says, "I told them how great of a job you did. Like, I'm still tingling." That's Pete basically assuming his like submissive posture. He's like, "Okay, Don, I see you. Like, I tried to take this from you, but it's not my time yet. Remember that. Remember that. It's not yet Pete's time. It's not yet time for that fresh, sort of in your face, self-aware approach." And so he realizes, now I have to show my belly to him basically right now. He and nor the people that he is catering to are like ready to give up power. I have to wait for my in with the likes of Lee Garner Jr., who are ready to think more sort of progressively, you know, more sort of futuristically, more self-aware. The American dream is not exactly based in self-awareness. Then you see after he says that, Don gives him this, I can't get it to pause on the right thing, but you saw that he flashed him this little glare like, "Oh, I saw you in there. I know what you did, and you know what you did." And then Roger excuses himself. So he's been sort of crowded out. He needs to reestablish his place in the hierarchy, right? So what he's going to do is say, "Well, looks like you're all going to engage in some mid-level camaraderie. So I'll be on my way." Don, thanks again for the home run. So much like Dawn has to opt out of the bachelor party in order to kind of remain separated and like at arm's length from all of his little minions, so does Roger. You see here again this, I'm kind of ready to let go of power. He's in Dawn's office, like he's kind of almost looks like he's reporting to him. But at the end of the day, I'm not ready to give up that power yet. You guys enjoy your mid-level camaraderie. Like it's a total burn at the end of the day. And Dawn has to pay his respects. I love to come through. And now that he's got him back in this kind of submissive position, Roger can throw another little curveball to Dawn and say, "Speaking of which, since you love to come through so much, any chance you could patch things up with Rachel Mencken? Anyway, you can be as charming as I said you were." And here we come to the real reason. So Dawn is like, "Really? Do I have to?" Basically, like, is it me or her? And Sterling says the only thing that Dawn can't argue with. He says she's worth $3 million. So you get a sense of kind of their, you know, billings and a sense of like what's big business to them. You're supposed to realize here, this is kind of a mid-level agency. This isn't like the big, they're definitely not like a small fish, but a person who's worth 3 million is still like still a good billing for them. Obviously they're not making 3 million. And Don tries to play this off as, "You're a whore, like all you cares about is money." But he's not gonna like die on this hill because now he's kind of curious. He's like, a woman that's worth 3 million, you know, he's starting to realize like, uh-oh, like something is different. Something is changing. And basically this is where Roger explicitly tells him that money is possibly the only thing that supersedes bro code. Because if you don't realize, basically Roger just asked Dawn to grovel. He's asked man coming off of this meeting, the successful pitch that he pulled out of thin air, etc. He's asking him to go grovel to a woman that he very disrespectfully dismissed, but he basically makes it clear that I don't care if she's a woman, she has money and you will respect that too. And so Dawn is like, okay, like he basically got checked a little because it's like, this woman is worth way more than you, so you better come correct. What really matters to Roger, what makes up like 90% of his quote unquote pedigree, is the fact that he understands that power is about money. It's not all about performing masculinity. Performing masculinity is a way to mimic power long enough to actually like do a power grab, which is what Dawn here is gonna, try to do during this series. But it is the ultimate power is money. It supersedes masculinity. It supersedes bro code. It supersedes like partnerships at work, etc. Don knows that he can't die on this hill because now money just got brought into it. And Roger has basically told him in so many words, you're not worth 3 million, she is. And again, Don is nothing if not a quick learner, right? So he sees Roger pull a power move, so he pulls a power move. He's like, actually get out of my office. I'll do you one better. I'm not just going to leave like Roger. You guys have to go. And they're like, working day's over, bro. What do you want us to do? We're going to a bachelor party. They try to talk him into it again. Aren't you going to give Pete his big send off? And Dawn wants Pete to know that Pete fucked up. He's like, maybe next time. He's throwing shade in like all sorts of multiple ways. He's once again rejecting Pete's olive branch. God, why was I going to say fig leaf? Pete's olive branch. And he's like, no, you undermined me and I won. I won in that meeting and you didn't. Your idea sucked. My idea was good, even though I didn't have one. And so look at the contempt on his face. There's some very good acting in this show, some very good face work in this show, because you can see how he's like trying to communicate to Pete that was not lost on him, that Pete's undermining of his was not lost on him. And so he's like, nope, maybe next time. And again, he's throwing shade like, your marriage is not going to work out, just like I told you it won't. Basically, you're going down the wrong road, kid. You mess with the wrong guy. And Pete just won't give up on like trying to out alpha Dawn. Right here, he goes, Dawn will join us later, won't you, Dawn? And basically tries to have the last word still in the conversation, leaves his drink on his desk, leaves the invitation, and tries to walk away. And Dawn is like, oh, you're not walking away like this, motherfucker. If Greta's research was any good, I would have used it. And Pete's like, what are you talking about? And Dawn's like, I'm just saying, I had a report just like that. And Pete says, I still think she was right. So he kind of takes a stand. He's like, no, you're not just going to like tell me how things work. Like he just won't give up on trying to prove himself as not only a formidable competition to Don Draper, but also as the man who's like going to take him down eventually. He's very dead set on this. He's very much romanticizing the idea of like dominating Don and sort of like having his way with him. He's like, this is the man I must conquer to get to what rightfully belongs to me. And Don's like, have a great night, Pete. Congratulations. He's basically like, you're chum to me right now. I don't really care. And basically sends him off like, I'm still in charge. So here comes Peggy, and she wants to be also congratulatory to Dawn. She goes, I heard you were amazing in the meeting. And he says, fear stimulates my imagination, which honestly is probably one of the more self-aware things that he'll ever say. And he likely won't even realize the actual weight of how much that means. And here comes Peggy. This is again why she just gives me such strongly neurodivergent vibes, because she's like, okay, I get it. Here's what I'm supposed to do. And then she just does it with all the confidence of somebody who knows what to do or like conceptualizes of what they're supposed to do, but all the experience of someone who's never actually done it. And so she's basically awkwardly like trying to hit on Dawn here. She's like, thanks for standing up for me with Mr. Campbell. And it tries to kind of like put her hand on his, and he very decisively moves her hand off and sort of lays down this boundary with her. He's like, I'm your boss, not your boyfriend. Which we'll see later that Don really has no professional boundaries like that. Actually, he will definitely be both your boss and your boyfriend at the same time. He has no problem doing that, actually. But he's just like, Peggy's not really his type, and he's like preoccupied with other things. And that other thing is that Pete is nipping at his fucking heels. He's like, your job, Peggy, as my secretary, is less to like fuck me and more to gatekeep my trash, my ideas, my like method of operation. Because, you know, what the cigarette thing has proved to him is that when everybody has a disadvantage, everybody has a disadvantage. But also, it's like whenever you mentor people a little too much, you're putting yourself in danger. You're vulnerable. And so the bigger thing that he needs to make clear to Peggy, and the reason why he's not so much concerned with like getting his dick wet right now, is because he's like, I'm going to lose my opportunity to get my dick wet if Pete Campbell keeps going through my trash, right? Because Don just tried to play it off to Pete like, you know, that research wasn't good, right? When in reality, he was threatened by the research. He was threatened by what the research had to say. He was threatened by the woman who presented it. And Pete is right to kind of stand his ground on the fact that he was right. Pete is not just being haughty. He's not just being like overly confident. Pete, once again, he represents the voice of a new generation. And he was right. And they'll find this out later when they, spoilers for the next 5 seconds, when they lose Lucky Strike as a client eventually. But Don is like now convinced that the only way that he's going to keep his job is to keep this aura farming thing that he's got going on, to keep this sense of mystique and unapproachability and unattainability. And so he's like, Peggy, your job is to gatekeep. You've already let multiple people go through my doors, like just open them and like walk in. You need to make sure that people don't even think it's okay to approach me, to go through my things, to walk into my office freely. Don is trying to like reclaim his ground because his success is no longer guaranteed. He also realizes that unless that old man was in the room, they would have gone with Pete's idea and he would have been squeezed out. He would have been sort of bested in his own arena. And he was almost ready for that. As Pete was presenting, like Don was sitting there, like head hung low, just like, okay, this is it. They found me out. They found out I'm a fraud. I guess it's a good thing this kid is here to save the campaign because I didn't really have anything to say. And he was ready to accept his fate until the old man was like, what are you talking about? And Don was like, the old man is still in charge. So it's like Don is very aware that there is a changing of the guard, and he's decided that the way he's going to get through that is by gatekeeping. So he harshly rejects Peggy because he needs her to understand that he can't lose his access to this prestigious position. She was like too loosey-goosey with just letting other people in there. He's like, if you ever let anything happen to my again, like you won't be able to find a job selling sandwiches in Penn Station. He's like, I will ruin you. And she's like, understood. Like now she's terrified. Like he said, he left his fountain pen in here. She wants Don to know that she had a reason, but he doesn't care about the reason. And then here she says, I hope you don't think I'm that kind of girl, is because she realizes Don feels more about her the same way that the doctor kind of feels, where he's like, you're not that kind of girl. You're not like Joan. I don't want to see you acting like that. And this kind of contributes to the dynamic that tears Peggy and Joan apart, because what Dawn has just told her is that I don't find you attractive like that. You are not gonna appeal to me with this male gazy behavior. I need you to be competent. Joan is telling her, you need to be pleasant. You need to be sensual. But Dawn just told her, you need to be competent and you need to like fight these men. You need to be sort of like able to protect me. And so that's why Joan and Peggy will kind of always struggle, because Peggy is gonna want to be approximate to power in a different way than Joan was approximate to power. Because you'll find out later, again, spoilers, that Roger and Joan definitely, you know, have a thing. They're having an affair. So Joan is like biased towards that. She's like, this is how you're going to approximate yourself to power. This is how you'll be protected. And so Peggy tries that. She goes, thank you for protecting me. Dawn immediately fires back with, I don't want to be protecting you. I need you to protect me. Why did you let people in this office? You let them steal my secrets. You need to become my co-conspirator, not my lover, not my affair partner. And again, because Joan had earlier said like that a secretary was fired because Dawn wasn't like happy with her, Peggy understands that it's not Joan that's deciding her future. It's Dawn. And so that's who she's going to be appealing to. And so she takes this whole, I hope you don't think I'm that kind of girl approach. And Dawn is like, no, of course not. Like, whatever. Go home, put your curlers in. We'll get a fresh start tomorrow. And then he asks her to place a call, which obviously she will be able to do, because she is in good with the phone operators. Okay, so here we are at the bachelor party, and you'll notice that Sal showed up. And so they're basically on their most like playboy behavior. And Salvatore is like trying to do his best to kind of play this, oh, I'm super straight card. Like, come on, I'm Italian. Like, I'm destined to be a bachelor. And they get approached by a couple of women. Basically, the insinuation here is that this is a transactional interaction. They're not explicitly categorized as like call girls, but they're kind of like bar girls, party girls. It's basically entertainment for hire or performative femininity on demand. So what they're paying these girls for is to like sit there and act like they're the most interesting thing in the world. This is a nod to the simulated environment of the patriarchy. This is definitely a commentary on how when men can't get attention from women, they hoard resources and force women to exchange their attention and their sense of safety for resources so that men can sit there and feel masculine and feel like they're conquering something or dominating someone or whatever. But basically, this is why we kind of see it cutting from the girls, which at this point, by the way, this exchange between Sal and one of the girls, she says, I love this place. It's hot, loud, and filled with men. And he says, I know what you mean. And she's like, okay. And so this is why it keeps cutting like back and forth between the girls sitting with the guys and the young woman performing on stage, because they're essentially doing the same thing. Their job is essentially to make these men feel masculine. It's to perform this idea of vulnerable, exposed, easy to manipulate kind of femininity, kind of, ease that makes men feel safe, that makes them feel like the big dogs in the room. And it holds men to this unspoken standard. And the other important thing that it does is it eliminates that male to male competition. It rebalances the hierarchy into now there's just two tiers. There's men and women. And so the juxtaposition of this idea of men versus this idea of a women is what allows the young men to sort of like let loose with each other and practice like this is like their male bonding rituals, because the only time they can really feel safe around each other is when there's like more vulnerable creatures in the room with them. And so men can sort of stop like beating their chest and like showing each other their red butts or whatever, because now there's like women and they soften the atmosphere and they sort of like diffuse that sense of male competition. Now, I wanted to pause here because Pete says one of the stupidest things you'll ever hear on TV, this young woman who there's a pretty strong insinuation that she was literally paid to hang out with him. And not only do the men who paid her know it, but Pete knows this. And yet he really wants to believe that there's a world in which girls are just sugar and spice and everything nice. He literally says to her, I have a feeling you're like this all the time, immediately after she pretends to get drunk off of literally one sip of alcohol. So it's like she's clearly putting on a performance, and he's like, perform harder. I have a feeling you're like this all the time. I have a feeling that you're so easy to conquer and impress and make laugh. Because she says, I like to laugh. And he immediately is like, so it's okay if I just like sexually harass you real quick, right? It's okay if I just assume that I'm entitled to your body. Because now you realize the reason why he said, I have a feeling you're like this all the time. It's a manipulative thing that men say to sort of preempt you feeling too uncomfortable to show any discomfort. He's like, I have a feeling you're like this all the time. And so what she hears in her head, perform, 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 giggle, laugh, squirm, whatever. And so she tries to tell him nicely, now you stop that. And he's like, well, you like to laugh. And he just keeps kind of, assaulting her. And she's like, this is too much. And he keeps pushing. And she's like, hey, I said stop it. What do you think you're doing? And he goes, you know what I'm doing. He basically tries to call her out on the fact that this is a transaction. And she's like, you know what, girls? No, it's not that kind of transaction. You guys paid us enough to hang out with you. This was not what we agreed to. And so she basically rejects Pete's advances and makes him feel like a loser, which he's, of course, going to have to remedy somehow. He tries to push it again, and she's like, you're hurting me, like I'm about to make a scene. And she moves her spot, like very visibly, very pointedly rejects him, like, I do not want you to touch me. And it's like his bachelor party. So he just feels rejected in all kinds of ways right now. His masculinity feels all sorts of attacked because it rests on this idea of being able to dominate women. And even more so now that he wasn't able to dominate Don Draper, right? Because there's a world, a parallel universe in which Lee Garner Sr. does not show up to the office, in which in this very first episode, Pete sort of is able to mount Dawn, for lack of a better metaphor, and sort of out dominate him in front of everyone, which was like Pete's chess move. He's been probably plotting and scheming this. Remember, it's only Peggy's first day at work. Everyone else has been here. And so Pete's been probably plotting and planning against Dawn for a long time. Basically, his most recent attempt to do that failed. But there's a world in which he succeeds, and there's a world in which that old man does not show up to the meeting, and Lee Jr. loves the idea, they buy it, they go with it, and that's where Dawn's like ultimate downfall would begin. And so Dawn is basically trying to stave that off, which he does successfully, but it leaves Pete feeling like a total loser. And I think that if he were able to sort of outperform Dawn in that meeting, I think he would have walked into this strip club a very different kind of man. He would have probably rejected women's advances, if anything. He would have probably been like, easy, ladies, I'm getting married tomorrow. Because ultimately, this is where we have to talk about men, especially the men of this era and men who yearn for the old-fashioned, ways, being homosocial, being basically more romantically attached to the idea of bonding with other men than the idea of bonding with a woman as an equal, as a partner, etc. That's why a lot of these guys will get their identity and their sense of confidence and their sense of belonging from women as sort of the lowest rung of that validation ladder. And not only that, but these are women that they know they had to pay to hang out with them. So what's better than that is the approval of your boss, or being able to outperform your boss, overtake, another man. That's the real objective for most of these men. They're not fighting for the affections of women. They're fighting for the affections of men typically that are above them. Women are the thing that they use to validate them when men are not willing to. And you'll see this a lot. And so basically, yeah, there's a world in which Pete feels so validated by the previous events of the day that maybe he even goes straight home to Trudy and says, I ditched the bachelor party, I'm a respectable man, like, etc. And, he starts to sort of mimic the higher level behaviors of respectability politics. Because right now what they're engaging in is frat house behavior, which is the lowest rung of the validation ladder that you'll notice these men will keep going back to. They'll keep scraping the bottom of the barrel of validation that they ultimately have to pay for. And of course, again, it's all about performance, right? Where's my pointer? Again, we flash back to a performance because what Harry just did was perform. When she said, so what do you fellas do? Harry says, you're looking at the finest ad men in New York, hell, the world. And just the same as he's performing this masculinity and success, she's performing this idea of like mystique, femininity, sensuality, etc. And of course, here's Pete. They had to show the shot of him feeling completely defeated, feeling completely out dominated, out alphaed, etc. He's very salty at this point. He's like, how am I going to get my validation? We cut to a very skeptical Rachel out to dinner with Dawn. Obviously, she is intrigued by him somewhat. She agreed to the meeting, but he's going to have to grovel a little bit because she just can't pass up this opportunity to kind of flip the power dynamic on a man who thought he was going to slam the door on her. Like, can't blame her for that and love her for that, because she is like on his neck a little bit here, more so than most of the men around him. She's like checking his behavior. And she calls him out on that too. She says, you got in trouble, didn't you? And as you can see, he's like not amused by that. He says, I shouldn't have lost my temper and I shouldn't have treated you like anything less than a client. Which is, again, he's saying the quiet part out loud. Yeah, I misread the room and I treated you like a woman. Again, signs of how outdated his morals, values, ideals really are. He's the old American dream. The new American dream belongs to everybody, and he didn't get that. He didn't read the room. And now he's like being forced to read the room and apologize to this woman, which she accepts. And she's basically like, well, you guys said all the things that I assumed y'all were thinking, so thanks for at least being honest. Like, obviously, she's taken pushback in stride the way that Dawn never could, demonstrating the fact that she's quite a bit more alpha and quite a bit more self-aware and reasonable and logical of a person. She's like, you know, that hurt my feelings too, me having to be like faced and confronted with the truth. But you freaked out, you threw a little tantrum, and I thought about it and saw the silver lining that it confirmed sort of my fears, but at least now we can go from there. And the only thing he's concerned about, right, is not learning from her wisdom that she's displaying here. He's like, well, I'm not really as bad as all that. Again, he's only concerned about PR, status, image, perception, etc. I was under a lot of pressure, another account. Basically, he's committing a lot of sins here. He's telling her he's not good under pressure. And he's also telling her there's accounts that are more important than hers. And again, this is what I mean when I say Don kind of lets his guard down around marginalized communities, but not in a good way, in a way that centers himself and in a way that forces them to sort of like cater to his feelings or do the uncomfortable thing of like calling him out to his face. And look, she rolls her eyes, and good for her. And he's like, yeah, okay, so it doesn't really matter. You don't care about that stuff. He's getting a little quicker. He's like, okay, I got to read the room. I got to do this. Otherwise, Roger's going to be unhappy with me, which will be good for Pete, which means Pete can weasel his way in because I just figured out that I'm barely hanging on by a thread. So if you're ever wondering, you know, what's Don's impetus for like hiring Peggy, he still did good, you know, for women and came back and apologized to Rachel and all that. His impetus was saving his own ass. That's what it always is. You need to always look at Don this way, and his character will make perfect sense. He's a coward. And she's like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't. Quit fucking feeling sorry for yourself. And so they kind of start their game of cat and mouse here because she likes him. You know, he's handsome. As part of like two marginalized groups, you know, during this time, Rachel also has, you know, some dilemmas to consider. She has things to think about. She wants to break the mold. And so she's curious. She wants to join the mainstream and not sort of feel limited by how this version of America and the American dream perceives her. Does that make sense? Like she's kind of ready to like conquer the mainstream. And so in her mind, she's ready to conquer Dawn. This is a very interesting dynamic. And so he's like, can I ask you a personal question? And she kind of flirts with him. She's like testing the water. She's like, don't you want to get a second drink in me first? And he drops the question that by the look of on her face, she was dreading and kind of ready for. He's like, why aren't you married? I'm sure a question that this poor woman has heard a billion times. Like, look at her face. She's like, oh my God, this shit again. And she's like, so you're asking what's wrong with me? And he's like, no, no, no. It's just that, like, don't you think that getting married and having a family would make you happier than all the headaches that go along with fighting people like me? He's basically trying to intimidate her. Do you guys see that? This is how MAGA, and this is how, the fundamentalist Christians and, the people that are behind Project 2025, this is what they're going to try to sell you on, right? And this started with the whole women shouldn't work under fluorescent lights and I'm just a girl. The reason I'm dissecting this show is that they're going to try to lie to you like this again. They're going to say women shouldn't be working in harsh conditions. Women are just girls. Women want to stay home and get married and raise children. That feminism ruined everything. Feminism ruined our society. Why are women out here fighting people like Dawn? Women are out here, trying to compete with men and like all this stuff. Wouldn't it just be nicer for you to just get married and have some kids and stay out of my territory? Don't encroach on me. Don't tread on me. And she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? She's like, if I weren't a woman, I wouldn't be allowed to ask you the same question. And if I weren't a woman, I wouldn't have to choose between putting on an apron and the thrill of making my father's store what I always thought it should be. She's like, are you really so like blind? Like, can't you see what's happening here? Why can't I ask you the same question? And how would you feel basically if our positions were flipped? And what if I have dreams and ambitions? And what if I want to change the world? What if I want to make something what I always thought it should be? What if I want to control the narrative? So what they're really fighting for is not jobs. They're not competing for the same position, but she's a threat to him regardless. If women are allowed in male-dominated fields, then he no longer knows how to navigate it. That's what he's realizing. So he's not really taking her out to dinner to try and persuade her to become their client again. He's taking her out to dinner to try and derail her career and convince her that she'd be better off married with children. The foreshadowing here is crazy, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm too tired. And he's like, so that's it? You won't get married because you find business to be a thrill. And basically, he's kind of trying to attack her femininity in the way that men feel constantly attacked and emasculated by questions like that. But she's like, yeah, I do. I do find business to be a thrill. That, and I've never been in love. She's like, maybe I have high standards. And so Don now kind of has his in. He goes, I think I wrote that once to sell nylons. And she's like, for a lot of people, love isn't just a slogan. Like, she's trying to explain to him that not everybody is a psychopath, that people are looking for partners and, they're not necessarily looking at marriage as a way to like escape something, which is basically what Don is insinuating. And Don, of course, again, takes the condescending road. He's like, oh, love. Yeah, you mean the big lightning bolt to the heart where you can't eat and you can't work and you just run off and get married and make babies. He's like, feelings? Ha ha. The reason you've never felt it is because it doesn't exist. And again, men like him think shit like this is a flex. He does not realize this for the pure psychopathy that it is. He's genuinely trying to convince this young woman that the feeling of closeness with somebody that makes you want to spend your life with them and makes you want to like have partnership and everything like that is because men like him sold it to you, is because it's all made up and he doesn't realize that it is a real feeling that people like him have capitalized on because they think it's made up. And he says his infamous line, what you call love was invented by guys like me to sell nylons. And in a way, he's right. Like, romantic love is for sure an invention of the patriarchy. But the feeling of intimacy, closeness, building family and community together, that's not made up. That's a real thing. You just have to work for it and not sell it, not be sold it as an idea. That actually takes hard work, which again, remember, Dawn is the era of the American dream that is all about comfort, availability, and major reset that caused the playing field to be level, but only for white guys like him. And he was able to sort of get his jump. So in this situation, just like many others, he's speaking to something that he doesn't really understand or has a very surface level understanding of, which is what makes him inherently bad at his job. He's just guessing his way through life. like a psychopath, and he thinks it's a flex. And he says this, whole spiel about you're born alone and you die alone, and this world just drops a bunch of rules on you to make you forget those facts, which is true only if you buy into the narrative. And it also shows his privilege that sort of the most monumental thing for him is this idea that you're born alone and you die alone. Again, this idea of like stupid stoicism that men are like attached to, when in reality, we don't really do anything alone. Like, that's an illusion. That's a mirage. We are all connected. And the rules are dropped on us to make us forget those facts, not the fact that we're alone. Loneliness and isolation is a very strong theme in this show because it shows how it's intentional. It's intentional in this kind of meritocracy, this kind of hierarchy-based community. And right before he gives her this look, he says a bunch of things that are ways in only which a psychopath would think. He says, I never forget. I'm living like there's no tomorrow because there isn't. And while he's telling the truth, it's also a very short-sighted way to live your life. He's like, yeah, I'm basically living my life by the seat of my pants because that's what I think being a man is. Because I was raised in this idea that sacrifice and uncertainty was king. And so all I long for is the sense of comfort. And again, she's looking at him like, are you okay, sir? This is a Wendy's. And in this moment, instead of rightfully calling him a psychopath, though, she says, it must be hard being a man too. She's very empathetic. Because marginalized groups are more likely to be empathetic, they're also more likely to see the system for what it really is. Like, Don will never realize that the patriarchy is hurting him. But here Rachel clocks it in the very first episode. And he literally goes, excuse me? Yeah, he'll never realize it. And she says, Mr. Draper, I don't really know what it is you believe in, but I do know what it feels like to be out of place. So again, while he can sort of fly under the radar of the likes of Roger Sterling or whatever, like men who ultimately don't care about anyone but themselves, but people who have had to learn to read the room and people who have had to learn to sort of operate by these unspoken rules, they see each other. And so where Don doesn't even know that his poverty and that his sense of not belonging is showing, she's like, no, I see you. You're out of place. You're disconnected. To see the whole world laid out in front of you, like she's reading him like a book, the way other people live it. And she's like, there's something about you that tells me you know it too. She's like, you're an outsider too. And of course, he tries to gaslight her. He's like, I don't know if that's true. And tries to pivot the conversation. You want another drink? And she's like, no, but I'll take pity on you. You can tell your boss that you charmed me. And she's basically going to take off because she sees right through his try-hard demeanor. And she's like, this is interesting. Let me see what's here. And so they're both sort of at this point intrigued by each other. Okay, and just for the sake of finishing out this part of this first episode, because all my batteries are about to die and it's like nighttime at this point, I don't want to do more than 3 parts. So here's the scene where Pete basically rolls up directly to Peggy's house. He's feeling rejected. He's feeling like a total loser. Kind of so is Peggy, though. And this is basically the moment where Peggy's like, okay, I'm going to take Joan's advice. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try the thing that Joan told me to do. Feeling sorry for a man is going to be the beginning of her misfortune. Just like Rachel, Peggy senses, these scenes don't follow each other like that just for no reason, right? This is both an instance where a woman who takes pity on a man that she shouldn't have and is going to eventually regret it. So again, Pete tells her kind of wordlessly without saying it directly. And there's a difference in between what he says and what she hears, which is another dynamic that's going to happen a lot in this show. But when he says, I wanted to see you tonight, he means I needed to be validated. And nobody validated me, neither at work nor while I was out with the boys. And I need to be validated on the night of my bachelor party somehow. So you're basically my last resort. Like, I'm here after all of that. And she goes, me? Like, literally, this is the difference. Like, he's saying one thing and she's hearing another because the concept of love as this like lightning bolt or whatever was invented by Don in order to sell stockings, but it was also mostly invented by men like Don to sell the patriarchy. And so what Peggy's hearing is, I'm special. He picked me. He chose me. Because men give up their life to be with women. Men are the important ones. They're the ones we need to cater to. They're the ones we need to protect. And they're the ones we need to make sure that we are in good graces with. And Peggy's sensing she's not in good graces with Dawn right now. So she's feeling kind of desperate and invalidated too. And they kind of meet each other in this moment. And he's like, I had to see you. He's not even looking at her. He's looking off into the distance because he's not thinking about Peggy. He's thinking about how he was basically humiliated like multiple different times today. And she's not looking at him either. She's thinking about, is this the thing that I'm supposed to do? Is this my chance to do the thing that Joan was telling me to do in order to get ahead and like succeed or whatever? And so basically Peggy submits in this moment and brings Pete into the apartment and decides to see what the fuss is all about and what's what. We arrive at the final few minutes of our pilot episode. Here's Don in his disguise. He's got his trench coat, he's got his hat, and we see him walking, and he makes his way out of the subway and into a car, which lets us know he's a commuter. He doesn't live in the city, and he pulls up to a house in the suburbs, and he gets out of the car, and this is where we get the big reveal that Don is a whole ass family man. He has a wife and children and a house in the suburbs. And wow, she's gorgeous. Like, she's the all-American dream. Her name is Betty. And, you know, she doesn't question his indiscrepancies. She's like, I called the office, but they said you left. And he, you know, tells her some half-assed lie, didn't want to bother you, whatever. She's like, I assumed you were staying in the city again. They clearly have this dynamic where she's the understanding, submissive, like traditional wife. And so she tells him there's a plate in the oven. So even though you weren't home for dinner, I still made sure dinner was warm for you. She's like, it's no bother, you know, you can call me late, da da da. She's like, sexy, carefree, always joyfully available. She's like, unless you're not hungry. And we see him walking up to his children's room. And it's this moment, I think, that's supposed to show us that he is deeply, deeply lost. He's like, what the fuck am I doing? I really do have these children and like a whole ass family, whole ass wife at home. And so this scene is supposed to show us that he's living two completely different double lives. We're going to go ahead and cut it here. Obviously, this is the end of season 1, episode 1. Like I said, the following breakdowns should be a little bit less intensive and a little bit less like symbolism based, because hopefully we have laid all the groundwork here that we'll need to move forward. So I'll see you in season 1, episode 2. Godspeed.